Hello everybody, I'm Turney Stevens, Dean of the College of Business at Lipscomb University. And joining me today are Dr. Mike Kendrick, our Associate Dean, and Tom Gray, who's a member of our Board of Visitors. The three of us just returned a week ago from a trip to India. We're preparing for a new MBA study trip, and we thought what we would do today is just tell you a little bit about what we saw and what we learned. So let me start, Mike, with you. You're our Associate Dean for Global Studies. This is your area. Tell me the most vivid impression that you brought back from India.
I think the most vivid impression I have was a meeting that we had in Mumbai, and Vadi. And Vadi he's a CEO and general manager of a company there, and he spent an hour and a half to 2 hours with us, talking with us. And he gave us this history of India, and that history is that up until about 1600, it was growing at a rate. It had 23% of the world's market share, and then the British take over, and it goes down to 3% or 1% up until India is liberated from British rule, and then they grow at a rate of about 3% a year because they chose a Soviet style for their economy, and then in 1991, they decided to do away with that, and that economy is really growing. But the thing that got me the most from that session was the idea that the Indians believe that they can grow, and that the whole notion is that they can grow. So it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy that they will continue to grow.
I felt what I got from that same meeting, kind of going with that, is that where he said with just the purest confidence, most absolute confidence, that he had just started his business 3 years earlier and had already grown it tremendously. But he said that in India, or all of his friends and business associates, that if you're not growing at 25% a year, you're a failure.
Yes. And
it's that confidence that I didn't expect from the Indians, and we saw it not just with this very successful businessman, but all the way down, say, from our guide.
Yes.
He also made the point, as I recall in that meeting, that castes and classes don't matter anymore. Mm-hmm. And you know, India has been a society where if you were born into a particular caste, I think there were 5 of those historically, you were pretty much doomed to stay in that caste, for life. And now there's a whole new environment in India about the possibilities for the future, about entrepreneurship. So that came as a surprise to me, and certainly is a very hopeful thing for India's future. I think my answer to my question would be that the slogan that the travel agency in India uses, "Incredible India,"
yes,
is exactly right. It really was incredible. Not perfect. We saw a lot of poverty. It's not a particularly clean country by our standards. We might even call it a little shabby. But it is just absolutely incredible in terms of the scale. 1.3 billion people. In terms of the fact that India, for the next generation, will continue to get younger and younger and younger. China's getting older and older, as are we. When you think about the fact that 80% of the Indians live on less than $2 a day, mm-hmm, which is not very much, we think about how much poverty there is in India, and yet if you remember that the other 20% represents a nation of 260 million people, just think about it. That's nearly a country as big as we are.
Yes. And I think the thing, just building off of that, is this year they're hitting the threshold of per capita income at $1,000, which for India is amazing. And they're really playing this up because they're saying that their purchasing power at $1,000 was much more than what China had at $1,000. So the opportunities for India to grow is, like you said, incredible. And that's what I see coming out of India, is this incredible country that's believing in itself and now is going to take off and grow.
So let's recount our trip for our viewers, stop by stop. And Tom, we started in Delhi, which is the capital of India. So let's begin our conversation today in Delhi. What impressed you about Delhi? What disappointed you about Delhi? What are your memories of Delhi?
Well, it's the trip is expectations. tried the exercise from Dr. Kendrick's class. I put myself as a student in his class and did the exercise of what did I expect and versus what did I realize when I was there. And so I expected something similar to Beijing. 18 months ago I was there with wide boulevards and wide sidewalks and everything spit shined, and this was everything but. This was it was total chaos. And to be fair, we got there on Sunday, or we got there Saturday night, but our first day out was Sunday, and we went to Old Delhi, and Old Delhi is a Sunday market, and first of all, the traffic is just unimaginable by U.S. standards. The worst kind of rush hour traffic with no lanes, just cut cars moving in and out, but it never stops. So you got this just from curb to guardrail, you have packed with motorcycles and pedestrians and automobiles and vans and buses, and then on the sidewalk, not a spot free on the sidewalk, packed with people and vendors and selling everything from used clothing to shoes to food vendors, and the smells and the activity. It was completely overwhelming. So again, didn't expect that at all.
So that was Delhi. We spent 4 days, I guess, in Delhi, but we did one day as a side trip, Mike, to Agra, which is where the Taj Mahal is located, and we had quite an interesting day of it, didn't we? We not only saw the Taj Mahal, but we had some other sightseeing to do along the way. So tell us about that.
It's 120 kilometers from Delhi to Agra. It took us 5 hours to get there. The roads were old. The infrastructure was not very good, but we got to see India in the rural sense, and I think the biggest eye-opening experience I had on that trip was, and this is going to sound really bad, cow patties.
Cow patties.
Cow patties.
Well, tell us what cow patties are.
You don't have to, you're from Alabama, Mike. You don't have to go all the way to India to talk cow
But
patties.
how the Indian people use the cow patties, and they put them in the sun to dry, and they use the cow patties as fuel. So there is no waste, and they have to use all the resources that they have available to them. And to see that, and just stacks and stacks and stacks of cow patties dry and going to be used. So that was eye-opening for me.
They figured out the green economy long before we did.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, since he brought up cows, we got to talk about, everybody wants to know about India and cows. Cow is from, we take their culture and their history back 5,000 years. We learn an awful lot about their history and their culture. And centuries and centuries ago, we learned that Indians did eat beef. But they became afraid that the cows would become too scarce and they wouldn't have them anymore. And they were dependent on the milk and all the products that came from the milk. So they as with their religion, it became part of the religion and custom that the cow is very sacred to us. It's very valuable to us. We will treat it like another human being. I mean, they sit on the side of the road. They walk through the middle of the street. And if you've seen the Chick-fil-A commercials with the menacing cows, I felt like that all the time. These cows just minding their way, doing whatever they wanted, and I just always felt like they were up to no good somewhere. but they're the most valuable, probably for the individual Indian, the most valuable commodity that they had, and everybody had their cow.
Ann asked me when we got back, she said, well, did the owners know where they were? And I said, I don't even know they had owners. I'm not sure who owned the cows. They just sort of wandered around.
I was told that they're like your pet dog who is let out to roam the neighborhood during the day. By dinner time, Tony, they will be back. That's what they said, that they will find their way home for dinner.
Well, Mike, to go back to our trip to Agra that day, we did go through a long process to get there, but we eventually got to the Taj Mahal. So that's an icon that everybody knows about, and everybody would like to see. Tell us
Yes.
about your impressions of the Taj Mahal.
Just magnificent, right? And the intricacies of the artwork on the marble that took 10 years and with no mistakes, and they could not make any mistakes. It was fascinating to see what they did. 20,000 people of 22 years.
22 years.
To build the Taj Mahal, and this took place in the 1600s. And then our guide told you that in today's dollars, $1 billion to build that facility. That's just mind-blowing. But it's the contrast between your blog that day was Rich Man, Poor Man. And I think that was quite evident of the contrast in India, that they were very rich and the very poor. And it was quite a place.
Tom, we left Agra to return to Delhi, and then almost immediately we left Delhi to go to Mumbai, which once was called Bombay. In fact, until about 4 or 5 years ago, I guess most of us knew it as Bombay. But it is the New York of India. It's the commercial and financial center of India. What were your impressions of Mumbai?
Well, it gets back to that, the chaos from Delhi and the chaos from our trip, the congestion, the masses of people, to now I'm starting to feel like we land in Mumbai, and if you saw Slumdog Millionaire, we confirmed there were no children playing cricket on the runway. I didn't see them anyway. But we landed in Mumbai, and the avenues were cleaner, they were wider, it seemed to be more organized, more professional people, cleaner, and that was my first impression. I'm thinking that, okay, now I'm finding a place that I could come back to. We were on the beach, the water was, that adds to every environment, being surrounded by water, and all the stories of Bollywood. So that was my first impression of Mumbai.
And then we saw the Taj Mahal Hotel, not the Taj Mahal, but the Taj Mahal Hotel, which is where the terrorist attacks took place just a couple of years ago. That was a very emotional moment for me, because I had watched that play out in the news media over several days, and of course I think there were maybe 180 victims of that. What were your impressions of having seen the Taj Mahal and now see it back in business and so much activity around it?
Well, it's that spirit that they have. They were wounded, and there's not the comparison of our 9/11, but that was their, I believe I can say, their biggest terrorist incident, certainly of recent times, and it affected their nation and brought their nation together, and they've moved on. And they're not going to let fear. I got the same impression that we are here. We're not going to let fear keep us from progressing. And the positive attitudes were no different in Mumbai than they were in Delhi, and the hope for the future and the outlook for the future.
We visited the Bombay Stock Exchange, Mike, while we were there, among other businesses that we visited with in preparation for our student trip next year. Bombay Stock Exchange is very interesting. I think there are 5,000 companies, as I recall, listed on the Bombay Stock Exchange, and there's actually another stock exchange, the Nashville Stock Exchange, also based in Mumbai. So it's sort of those two are sort of the center of entrepreneurial activity in the country. What was your takeaway from having seen that?
I think that starts I'm not going to get it until a few visits later, but our visit at the stock exchange was conducted by their human resource people. And then we go on to ICICI Prudential. See, I did say that right. And the CEO is also there with 2 HR people. And then we get to Bangalore, and our first visit in Bangalore is Wipro, and we have their one of their HR people there. And this is another great discovery for me, is their attitude towards, for lack of a better term, their human capital. And it's that they're investing in human capital. And that's what we were seeing at the Bombay Stock Exchange, is the training that goes on, and how they're looking not only for the people at the stock exchange, but people from all over Asia as well as all over the world, and training on how do you invest in emerging economies. And so I really think the advantage, my big takeaway from the trip from a business standpoint, is the competitive advantage I believe India has is its attitude towards its people and the investment that it's making in its people. At Wipro, what were they doing? 13, 14 days
a
in,
year.
in training
Per
every year.
For
every-
130,000 people.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and I mean, just think about the magnitude of that and the investment that takes. And they're not looking at it as a cost, they're looking at it as an investment.
Well, you were the one that really got me thinking about human capital versus machinery and equipment, and you noticed that before I did. We talk in this country about CapEx, capital expenditures, and when we talk about that, we're thinking about investing in machinery and equipment and the infrastructure of the business. And of course, we're in an era where we downsize from a human capital standpoint. India is just the opposite.
Yes.
They look at their investment, their most important investment, being in their people.
Yes,
And
Intellectual capital is a
Yes.
phrase I heard.
over and over again.
China's about manufacturing, India's about services, and those two differences, I think, are indicative of where the two countries are headed as far as the future is concerned. So that was a great observation when we were there, and I appreciate you remembering that here. So we spent 3 or 4 days in Mumbai. We had a good visit there. I think we were all fascinated by the sights and sounds of Mumbai as well as the businesses we saw there. One of the things that we did one morning, we toured through the slums that were made famous in the movie Slumdog Millionaire, and I think we were all fascinated to see that our definition of slum is not really the Indian definition of slum, because these were thriving businesses that we found. Tell us about that, Tom.
Well, that was my, when I wrote home during the trip, I pointed out that was the biggest gap from my expectation and the reality. That when we walked in, I was nervous. I mean,
I was too.
I'm a seasoned traveler. I've been to all kinds of places, but we had already driven through the outskirts. You know, the slum is just right there, and we had already we'd gone through the outskirts, and we could peer in and peer over. And when it was time, we almost knew. It was like a kind of a nervous anticipation. We get there, and he said, "Do you want to go in?" And I'm like, I think we were both like, no, I think I'm fine. I can see down the alley, and I think I'm good. He goes, "No, come on, it's perfectly safe." And thank goodness he did. I mean, goodness gracious. We went in there, and 2 steps in, and it was perfect, perfectly comfortable. We had right off we saw a bakery. We got a tour of a small bakery that's not much big. Can't hold much more than the 3 of us in there. They were making bread, and we're not talking about a big bakery that's serving 100 restaurants in Nashville. We're talking about a little bakery that's maybe providing bread to 1 restaurant or 2 restaurants. And then the people it was a microcosm. It was a world. It was a community. That's it. That everybody had a place in the community. Everybody was productive in the community. There were schools. There were church temples. It was really refreshing. It was just poor people. That's all.
Just poor people, but good people, and they were actively employed and engaged, and they had their own world that they were productive in.
And they made us feel just like everywhere else in India. They made us feel welcome.
Yeah, they really did. That's exactly right. And we found, I think, if I remember correctly, Tom, that there were 700,000 people living in this one small community within this large city. So the scale, again, is just amazing. It's unbelievable.
With no shelter bigger than 8 by 8.
Yeah, sure. So we concluded our visit in Mumbai, Mike, and for our final stop on the trip, we went to Bangalore, which is in the south of India, about a 2-hour flight, as I recall, from Mumbai. Very tropical climate, a beautiful area, a lot of flowers and trees in bloom, absolutely lovely. But tell us what we found in Bangalore.
That's where we find the IT industry and the software designers, and here are companies like Wipro and Infosys that started in 2001 with 5,000 employees, and now they're over 100,000 employees, and this is industries that are just taking off and growing. I think we were all really impressed with what was going on in Bangalore, and And the thing that we saw in Bangalore too was India working on its infrastructure. They're building the train from the airport into downtown Bangalore. So India, very apparent that they're building their infrastructure. They were building a mall right across from one of the hotels we were looking at. So
Very modern.
Very modern. And one of the students, we ran into some students on the train from Agra back to Delhi from Thunderbird. And one of the students made the comment to us and we were asking about Delhi, and we were asking about Mumbai, and then we were asking about Bangalore, and they said, you will realize in Bangalore why India is a BRIC country. And I think that realization finally hit when we got there. Yeah, that's why Bangalore is part of the BRIC.
It's really fascinating.
It is.
Each of those companies you mentioned, by the way, are worth about $6 billion with a B today, and they only started 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I want to take this opportunity and maybe talk about fears of the offshoring and the outsourcing, and what there's a lot of talk about and what we learned over there, and again, it's that expectation, and it's the expectation of Americans that we're losing jobs over there. And yes, we are. But what I saw, a similar thing I saw, particularly in Bangalore, that it was with China, is that the wages are coming up there. So there's not the huge, I learned the term, wage arbitrage. The wage arbitrage is huge anymore, and quickly, they told us salaries were going up 20% a year.
Yes.
Well, at 20% a year, it doesn't take long for low wages to become middle wages, and yes, our wages are coming down a bit, but they're going to meet, and everything's going to be fine. So what I came back with is not so much the fear of my children. What are they going to go? What's their opportunity in this global society going to be? But the market. Tens of thousands of people, Indians as well as the Chinese, are rising into the middle class, and don't look at your job going away. Look at the opportunity to market.
Yeah. Creates the opportunity for more jobs as the Indians grow, as the Chinese grow, and then if we're creative enough, and innovative enough, it gives us the opportunity to create new markets for jobs for our folks here. So we have to take this as great opportunity for the United States as well as what's going on in India, and build on it and create opportunities for our folks here.
Sure. I don't see how we can talk about India without talking about religion for just a minute. Having come from a Christian college, representing a Christian college, we were there to prepare for a business trip, but we represent a Christian college. We're all Christians. And so I had some very vivid impressions of the devotion of the Indian people. I was amazed to see how devoted they are to their concept of religion. And I was also fascinated to hear our guide say that basically there are no atheists in India. We found atheists to be prevalent in China, but basically no atheists in India. The country's mostly Hindu, with a lot of Muslims and a lot of Buddhists, very few Christians. So tell me about your impressions of religion in India. Tom, you first.
Well, I said I was very interested in this from the beginning, and as you guys know, I asked 10,000 questions on the subject. I was fascinated from the Hindu idols to the namaste. I'll give my story of the greeting, and it's soul's greeting, not individual's greeting. So it's the soul, your soul in your right hand, greeting the soul of the other, bringing together in the two hands the other soul, your soul, bring it together, leaning and casting off. I don't want to say evil, but negative powers, and then when you bring it back up, it's bringing in positive powers. But it's all the way to that. And the fact that I asked him, how many gods or lords do you have? Is it 1,000? Is it 100? He said, and they don't do millions. Their terms are different. He was trying to figure it out, and it's 330 million gods. And how do you explain that? How you explain that is that God is present. God is not a figure. God is a one God just like us, and Christian, and God is everywhere in everything. So when they respect each other, they respect everyone, like nothing I've experienced here. That is a guest. Why were we treated so well? A guest is a God.
Sure.
A guest is treated as a God.
They see God in everybody and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Mike, you lead our trip to China, so you've been several times. You're probably in the best position of any of us to compare China and India, not only in religion, but in any other aspect of the difference between the two countries, or maybe the similarities between the two countries. What thoughts do you have about China and India?
I think the biggest thought for me about China and India is China had a head start. China starts taking off in the late 70s, 1978, 1979, and their move towards capitalism and taking over markets and with the offshoring going on, they just take off, and they're growing at a higher rate than India. They're growing at about 9% GDP per year, and their per capita income is higher, but they've got about a 13 year head start. India takes off in 1991, and what they have done, and this is only 20 years, this is what's so phenomenal. It's only 20 years that they have just taken off. They were growing at about 3% per year in 1990, from 40 years between 1950 and 1991, and then have taken off, and they're growing at about 8% per year, which is just phenomenal. So a lot of similarities between the two countries. I agree with you on the devotion to religion that the Indians have. It's we should be so devoted. We may not agree with their philosophy, and then we've developed this sort of mantra about our program, and it's from Mark Twain, and it's travel is fatal to bias, bigotry, and prejudice. And talking about religion, we start to understand a little bit more about their religions, and it starts breaking down the barriers so that we can have a conversation. And I find that in India and China. The other thing is the hospitality, the kindness in China as well as India is
Amazing.
It's just amazing.
It really,
they're so inviting of us.
I had the same impression. Yeah. I agree with that. Well, our time's almost up, but let me end with one question to each of you. And Tom, I'll start with you. Since you're a business executive, let me phrase the question as this. So, taking your impressions of India, what advice, what comment would you make to business executives who may be thinking about India?
Well, the two there's the looking at the Indian market to do business in India, and looking to India as a resource, as a center of resources of intellectual capital. I would say we have so much in common. From we've talked a lot about the faith, the common faith. The fact that India is a democracy. Mm-hmm. And a well-established and something that they're very proud of. Yes. They mention that a lot, that they're very proud of being a democracy. To the English language, and that's it. That not only do they speak English, we learn that they think in English.
Yes.
So it's easy to work with them. They're welcoming. My advice is, after I get settled up over there, then you guys can come. But is they're open for business. Mm-hmm. We found that in China too. China is open for business. You go over there, bring them something where they're going to create jobs. The red carpet's going to be rolled out for you. There's a lot of opportunities to market. There's a lot of opportunity to cooperate with people, the Indian people.
And with 1.3 billion people in each country, actually, the subject's too big to ignore. So you have to be thinking about what your strategy is for your business in the 21st century. So Mike, since you're a professor in a university setting and you lead our student trips to China and now to India, what would be your advice to students as opposed to business executives from your impressions of their trip to India?
from both countries actually. The people in India, the students in India are hungry. They want to learn. Going back to what Vidi said is they believe they can grow, and it starts with their educational system, and the students want to learn. I flew differently than you guys. I flew through Paris, and I'm standing in line to get on the airplane in Paris, and there was a student in front of me, probably a graduate student, and the student is standing there in line to get on an airplane reading a modern history of finance. And I'm going, wow, would I see one of our students standing there reading a modern history of finance? But that talks about, to me at least, their determination to learn and to grow. A story in a book that I'm reading that you suggested, The India Way, talked about a surgeon who went to India and thought he was going to go over and teach the Indians a lot of things. And when he gets there, he finds out they taught him a lot of things, and they're moving very quickly. So for students, the world is changing quickly. The world is truly flat.
And I think my takeaway from having been to both countries is how hard we're going to have to work to keep up.
Yes.
We sometimes think of ourselves as the leaders, but they're working very hard to take that away from us. Absolutely. In terms of the number one position. And our students, our business executives in the 21st century have to realize the competition is pretty stiff.
Yes.
And we've got to work really hard to maintain our preeminence in the world economy.
May I share my advice? What I've been coming back with my main piece of advice, if you're an adult, if you're a parent, get over there. Go to India, go to China. It's not expensive. It's open, it's welcoming, and if you're a student, go to China, go to India. You've got to experience it. Get off the couch and go. Well,
that's a good note to end on. We were there to prepare for an upcoming MBA trip to India, which will begin in the spring of 2012. We appreciate Tom Gray and Mike Kendrick being with us today. We had a great time together. I can't imagine two better traveling companions than Tom and Mike. We had a lot of fun together, but we also learned a lot, and I'm sure that our students will too. So thanks for joining us today.
The blog?
Oh, and we did a blog too. We did a blog which is still available through the Lipscomb website, business.lipscomb.edu. And we actually had about 1,000 hits on that from all over the world. We had 20 people from South Korea that read the blog.
You did a fantastic job.
Well, I appreciate you guys making it easy to do. So I hope you join us again next time. This has been Conversations with the Dean. We'll see you next time.